Hello, folks. My name is David Berrios, and I am the head of community here at Swing Left. And I'll be leading today's conversation this afternoon about Swing Left's approach to using tech tools and platforms to empower grassroots action. Here at Swing Left, elections are our thing. We've focused on building a lasting culture of grassroots participation in winning elections for the left by making it as easy as possible for anyone to have maximum impact on the elections that determine the balance of power in this country. Big part of that effort is creating the digital tools and resources to help our community make strategic investments of their time and money. With thousands of potential campaigns to support, hundreds of civic organizations to work with, and really tried and true in-person ways to connect with voters, especially with new virtual opportunities as well, in addition to also just newly drawn districts that are going to contend and are going to just be hugely, hugely important in the fall. Getting involved can feel pretty overwhelming for a lot of folks. And so here, our job at Swing Left is to really uncomplicate the complex by developing tools that prioritize accessibility and our community's needs. That's why I'm really, really excited about today's panel and for our discussion around how we can approach leveraging these tech tools and platforms to educate, organize, and mobilize. So with all that being said, I'd love to introduce our panelists for today. First up, we have Ruby Anaya, who is the head of tech and product at Swing Left. She's an award-winning product manager, having previously led product at various startups and larger tech firms in the Bay Area and New York City, such as AOL, Yahoo, and most recently, WeWork. Ruby is the head of product here at Swing Left. She's guiding the team to build a different suite of volunteer and fundraising products that make it as easy as possible for anyone to have an impact wherever they live. Next up, we have Marilyn Cesar, who is the Senior Director of Product Management and Fundraising Products at Swing Left. Marilyn is essentially in this role helping launch new features and products aimed at helping donors give strategically and easily to candidates and organizations. Prior to joining Swing Left, Marilyn worked as a digital director at Flippable, an organization focused on flipping state legislatures blue, and as senior editor at Ellevest, an investment platform for women. And then finally, we have Scott Foreman, who is the executive director at Vote Forward. A software and product manager by trade, Scott was previously an early employee at OPower, where he helped build direct mail programs powered by software and insights from behavioral science literature to persuade millions of households to significantly reduce their home energy consumption. Scott leads the Vote Forward team and focuses most of his attention on product development, campaign design, and administration, as well as experimentation. So we have a full stack panel here for y'all this afternoon. And so we really want to thank all of our panelists and my colleagues for being with us this afternoon, and looking forward to today's conversation. Before we get started and we dive in on as to some of the questions, I'd love to invite you to visit our booth, if you will, virtual booth at the Expo for more information about all the programs and tools you'll be hearing about today. You'll be able to send us a message with any follow-up questions you may have, so a member of our team can get back in touch with you. So now, diving in. Ruby, when Swing Left was first founded, we developed a tool that volunteers could use to plug in their zip code and immediately locate their nearest U.S. House of Representatives swing district. This tool, was designed to mobilize volunteer energy and help point folks to where their work could make the most impact and make the biggest difference, so that we could flip the U.S. House from Republican to Democratic control in 2018. A lot has happened since then. Swing Left has grown a lot since then, and would love to just talk a little bit more about Swing District Finder. I'm wondering if you can share more with us about Swing District Finder tool, how you've seen it change and develop over the years, how you've approached developing and deploying this tool to make a real difference in the 2018 and 2020 election cycles.
Yeah, thanks, David. So I joined Swing Left in 2019. First interaction with Swing Left was actually in 2018, volunteering in New Jersey through the Swing District Finder. And so, like David said, it was very simple. The whole website itself was simply a Swing District Finder. You enter your zip code, you learn what your nearest swing district was, and we were really providing volunteers and donors with ways how they could get involved no matter where they lived. The team really leaned into that momentum of energy from our initial surge of people ready to get involved to develop Action Finder, which is another tool that we have in our product suite, which is like a Tinder-esque card interface to swipe through the most impactful volunteer fundraising actions, so users could identify the way they wanted to get involved in flipping the house in 2018. My team has since iterated on the Action Finder tool to meet the moment in 2019 and 2020, especially when we had to pivot to virtual only. And then this past year to improve accessibility and have more control on the back end on what actions we show and when. So our challenge really heading into 2022 is bringing this together the simplicity of the 2017 tool, given redistricting, and also adding additional levels of the ballot, and then continuing to meet users where they're at in terms of finding effective local or virtual ways to get involved at all phases of the cycle. As well, we need to continue to support our users by building context for that virtual and in-person volunteer and donor involvement.
Super helpful. Something that we value here, uncomplicating the complex, trying to make it as easy as possible for folks to make sure that they are clear on how they act with their time in this case. And it's something that I think really is manifested through Swing District Finder tool, and really what that we have, and really our users just take advantage of this tool as we move forward into just taking. So another piece of Swing Left tech that we've seen a lot of excitement about is what we call our groups tool. In my own work with the community team and the organizing teams here at Swing Left, I've seen a real hunger from our volunteers and grassroots leaders to organize and build power locally, something that Swing Left heard loud and clear when we developed this tool. Can you tell us a little bit more about the tool, how it works, and what that means for our organization's broader approach to how we develop tech tools?
Yeah. So Swing Left groups make it possible for organizers all across the country to recruit, engage, and mobilize volunteers at scale. Some of our groups have thousands of members, and some of them have started from just their local neighbors getting involved. The groups tool or group builder, as some of our volunteers call it, allow local chapters of Swing Left and also affiliates like Indivisible to establish an online presence and manage their community of volunteers while leveraging the Swing Left brand and platform. So sorry. They can send newsletters. They can organize in-person and virtual events through our integration with Mobilize America, and just generally promote their group's mission and focus to their community. Groups are just one of the many tools that Swing Left offers to meet grassroots organizers where they're at, providing them with the resources and support to organize locally. When I first joined Swing Left in 2019, like I mentioned, one of my first big projects was to really get to know group leaders, what motivates them, what are their pain points, especially in organizing. And we've made a ton of improvements to the tool, but definitely still have a ways to go.
Amazing. It's something I really value in terms of your leadership here when it comes to really hearing from the users themselves, and making sure that we're actually asking the right questions, asking the right stakeholders, asking the people who are actually going to be using this tool to actually meet the moment and actually meet their needs. So that's something that I've always really appreciated in terms of just like the overall ethos of Swing Left, and how much it prioritizes its users and their intake. Speaking of groups, a huge portion of our group's volunteerism this year was writing letters with Vote Forward. Scott, Vote Forward, helps volunteers, what we call adopt voters, and then really send them personalized letters encouraging them to turn out in their upcoming election. This type of voter contact at scale is really tech intensive, and in fact required building, a new platform that really didn't exist on the market. So you created it. Can you tell us about how Vote Forward got started, how you approached developing the platform to empower volunteers to help get out the vote?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, David, and thanks everybody who's watching for joining us today. It's a pleasure to be here. So let's see. I think origin story for Vote Forward goes back to 2017. The specific kind of voter contact that we do was inspired by my work at OPower, which you mentioned in your introduction, I had this hunch that handwritten letters might have a particularly sizable influence on people's voting behavior because they are pretty attention grabbing in the sense that if you get a handwritten piece of mail, you're really much more likely to open it. I know I am. So that was kind of the original idea, is to do something very genuine and personable, and to try to use that to influence people's voting behavior. The other part of my background is as a kind of like, not exactly a social scientist, but maybe play one on TV or something like that. I did that very first trial in 2017 as a randomized controlled trial, which is kind of the gold standard for proving causality and like the impact of a tactic like this. And I wasn't really expecting much, but it turned out to be sort of shockingly effective. So in that very first trial that I ran in Alabama in 2017, the letters that I wrote increased voter turnout by more than 3 percentage points, which is a huge number. And so over the subsequent year, replicated that result. And having seen it in action twice and seeing it work twice, it made me confident enough as the originator of this thing to ask other people to do it too. So like those first 1,000, I just wrote them at my kitchen table. But then for the 2018 midterms, we wound up writing more than 1 million, and that required software. So my background, as you mentioned, is as a software product developer. I have some friends who volunteered as developers to help me build this kind of early version of the platform in 2018. And it was sort of a novel need. So like what we actually built was a thing that generates many, many PDFs that are individualized for specific voters. And it took, some real software development to make that happen. But the very earliest version of the thing was pretty simple. It was just to handle the very basic task of volunteers making accounts, adopting voters, as we say, and then generating the PDFs that they would then print out and customize before sending them to voters. So the core thing was pretty straightforward, and we've really just elaborated it and made it more complex over time. It's gotten to the point now in 2020, we sent I think more than 20 million letters. And in order to do that, it required a lot more software, sophisticated software development. But the first version was pretty straightforward. And I think like if anybody who's watching is thinking, well, how do I build something like this? I think the answer is often start small. So like the very first version was very, very simple. And then we've it's evolved. The platform has evolved over time in response to the ways that people are using it and what they tell us they need and the changes in the political environment. So yeah, that's a brief version of the origin story for Vote Forward.
Super helpful. Thank you, Scott. I think the level of scale that these programs and this particular voter contact tactic, because of just like the way that you've been able to iterate and innovate over time, is so impressive. On top of which, it's just it's personalized letters that you're actually getting to send out to voters.
Yeah, so software is obviously a big part of it, but like you're right, the none of it would happen without the volunteers who we consider to be our clients. Really, they're the people that we're trying to serve.
Yeah.
And so if they feel good about what they're doing and they find it easy to use and easy to come back, then that's what makes it work. So like all credit to them.
100%. So one thing that's pretty unique about to Vote Forward is you're constantly experimenting, iterating, even during an election cycle. To ensure that you're really learning as much as possible. How to make the Vote Forward program and tools as effective as possible. One challenge for most organizations, however, is how to balance experimenting and learning with scaling a program so that it can hit critical mass. Can you tell us your approach to experimentation versus scaling, and share any interesting recent experiments you've undertaken and what you've learned from them?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to maybe cover two different threads in my answer. The first thread is that the that very first experiment that I did has now become kind of part of the DNA of Vote Forward as an organization, that we really almost everything we do, we test. So randomized trials are the core of our strategy there. And that has continued to be the case in the years since 2017. There is a trade-off between doing the tried and true thing, the thing that we know will work or have a great deal of confidence will work, and doing new and novel stuff where we're not so sure that it will work. And the way that we've approached it over the last couple of years anyway is to more or less separate those things. So we have two different types of campaigns that we run. One that we run under the banner of what's called Vote Forward Labs, where we're being very explicit with ourselves and with our volunteers that we don't really know for sure how well this is going to work, or we're trying to learn something new and it's a little bit uncertain, versus our core program where we have more confidence based on our historical track record. And the way we think about it is that experiments that we do in the Vote Forward Labs context can graduate into, if they're successful, becoming the new standard version of the program that we run in our largest campaigns, which tend to be, for obvious reasons, in the even numbered years. So the one other dimension to this is that the balance between those two priorities shifts depending on the electoral context. In 2019 and 2021, it's been mostly about trying to learn and improve for the following year. And in 2018, 20, and now 22, it's mostly about trying to maximize our impact based on everything that we know so far. So that's kind of the general framework that we use to think about this. You asked about recent experiments, just to give two examples in 2021 that I think are kind of interesting. One question that volunteers often ask us is, what should I write on my letters? Because there is an element of personalization. And we've never really had a systematic answer to that question. So this year, we finally did a rigorous test of that, where we had one pool of volunteers who we asked to write a certain kind of message, specifically a emotionally weighty, personal narrative, and another group of volunteers who we didn't constrain in any way. And then we observed the difference in increase in turnout between Group A and Group B, and we're able to demonstrate at least a suggestive result that the more personal stories are more effective. So that's an example of the kind of experiment that we do to make this core tactic that we have some proof around even more effective over time.
It warms my heart how personal stories just have so much of an impact, even in, newish letter writing voter contact tactics,
Totally. Yeah. And actually, I mean, this might be obvious, but that experiment was in part inspired by the really great work that Brockman and Kalla did on deep, I think those were the researchers, on so-called deep canvassing. So like the idea that if you're talking to somebody live in person, like telling your story is a really powerful thing. That's the same kind of thing that we're inviting volunteers to do in written form, but we really didn't know whether it would work better or not. And it does seem to, which is really encouraging. I wanted to cover one other aspect of sort of experimentation and testing, which is that the voter contact campaigns that we run, where we're reaching out to voters, that's in many ways the most important research that we do. But I would also say that taking the same sort of approach to everything else that we do, so the software itself, like my philosophy as a product manager is that you don't want to make big plans without a lot of evidence. And so like doing small pilots on the software development side, seeing how volunteers respond to those pilots before going big. I think that same ethos applies to pretty much everything we do on the site, or we try to make it apply. And I think that's part of the reason why we've been able to evolve the software in a productive direction over the last couple of years as well.
Well, it really speaks to what you said earlier around starting small, right? And using it essentially all those learnings to eventually scale. Yeah, totally. Um, super interesting. Thank you, Scott. I think this is also a perfect lead into learning more about Blueprint. Mary Lynn, you've already taken a really a research first approach to your product work on the fundraising side. Blueprint was created and based on user research conducted during your time at Flippable, and fills, I think, a real critical role in the donor space. Providing strategic guidance and advice to folks who might not otherwise have access to a donor advisor or similar support. This is a space that I think has been totally under-resourced until you developed Blueprint. Can you share more about how and why Blueprint was developed and how Blueprint is different from other donation platforms?
Yeah, certainly. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this Friday afternoon. Before I answer your question, David, I just want to give some background and explain what Blueprint is. So, Blueprint is a donation platform, as David mentioned, that provides donors with a diversified portfolio of candidates and civic organizations on a quarterly basis. We also offer donors the ability to request a custom blueprint, which is a bespoke portfolio that can prioritize certain geographies based on a donor's expressed interest, or we can just and we can do the same thing on the org side. So the origin story for Blueprint starts in post midterms 2018. At Flippable, we were reviewing our donor data and we saw an interesting trend. And we were in conversations with Swing Left in 2019. Flippable joined the Swing Left family. So that's how I was able to join this awesome organization. And the trend was basically that we saw a small portion of the donors on Swing Left's list, Swing Left and Flippable's list, approximately 30%, ended up accounting for 80% of donations in 2018. And we were just intrigued by this. We were like, oh, these donors are clearly moving significant amounts of money. There's something about the slates that we're presenting them with, which is resonating on a really deep level. And we wanted to probe deeper. So we started by conducting user interviews with a number of donors, and we just wanted to get some insight into what they liked about the political giving experience, specifically at Flippable and Swing Left, as well as their other interactions with the political giving ecosystem, and more importantly, what they dislike. And we heard a lot, like the endless emails, especially after you give, and then the next day you have another email asking you to give. The opacity, you're never really sure if your dollar makes a difference. And then you already touched on this in your question, but donors often feel like, hey, I'm moving a fair amount of money, so I would like a better experience, a more elevated experience. I can't afford a donor advisor per se, but I still would like that expertise and analysis. So we thought we had an opportunity to address this need by creating a donation platform that would serve these donors by helping them move their money strategically, intentionally throughout the year, because these donors were also people who tended to recognize the importance of early money in an election. So we embarked on this development process for Blueprint and worked very closely with Ruby on it, actually. And we did some prototypes that were at first were just clickable and had a lot of usability testing sessions. And we're just trying to say, okay, what's this flow? What should it look like? We looked to the financial services sector. You mentioned up top, I come from Ellevest, which is a robo-advisor for women. And knowing that we wanted to present a slate of options, we thought that there were things that we could borrow from the robo-advisor space. So when we say portfolio, when we use invest language, these are terms that signal to people, okay, this is something that's going to pay off over time. Portfolio, I understand that there are different pieces. I can also dive a bit deeper to understand why I'm getting this recommendation. And then we ended up doing this testing, finding out what worked, what didn't work. We also wanted to see how we could incorporate that impact reporting. How could we make that an ongoing part of Blueprint? So we added a dashboard. For the most part, if you give and you give through ActBlue, you just boop, and then you're out, and then you just get a thank you email. And then after the election, you find out if the candidate won or lost. With Blueprint, when you log in and you have to create an account because we want to track your donations, we want to help you understand how your money is moving the needle. You're able to see in that dashboard for that quarter how certain races stand to impact issues that are important to you. Also, every quarter, after the quarter ends, a month or so later, we provide all donors with an impact report where we go in depth into the races and organizations that we recommended in the previous quarter. And this is because we want to, yes, we have technology and it's great and you can get your portfolio, but we also recognize the value of the personal story, just like you were discussing with Scott. And these candidates are running for very important reasons. These organizations are mobilizing people in their communities for important reasons, and we really want to surface that. I think the last thing that I would like to mention with regards to Blueprint and what sets it apart from other donation tools in the market. Well, they're all great. Obviously, we're all working towards the same goal. So yeah, it matters what serves your needs at a given point in time. But we tried to incorporate personalization into it. So as I mentioned, you have the dashboard. You can see how your money stands to affect different issues. But even before you get to that point of donating, you tell us what's most important to you. If you want the majority of your donation to support candidates, organizations, or if they both have equal importance to you. And your portfolio, the weighting that's reflected in the allocation is updated in real time to reflect that. And there's a bit of an engineering feat on the back end so that enables that. So like when you put in the donation amount after you see the blueprint, you're like, oh, this is exciting. I want to invest this quarter. And then you go to Act Blue, it's reflected. So if you're all candidates, you'll see like 60% of your allocation reflected across like congressional candidates, Senate candidates, gubernatorial candidates, and then the remaining 40% across the funds that we're using to support civic organizations. So, and then as far as the research goes, we continue to engage our users. It's very important. This is a tool that was created to solve a problem and help people get access to analysis and expertise and just a better donation experience. So it's important to us that we're constantly checking in, figuring out what's working, what's lacking, and just how we can continue to deliver on our mission.
The level of agency that we're able to provide our users just by having it be so customizable is also just like so impressive when you think about it too. It's just, that level of impact, and then tracking that level of impact and visualizing that level of impact and sharing it is just, I think, something that is so critical in the donation space and the donor space. I'm particularly excited about, one of Blueprint's newest features, and that's giving circles and their ability to really harness the power of community, really. Democratic candidates and campaigns are facing an onslaught of conservative PAC money. But when we work together, with our network to pool funds strategically, we can really fight back in a way that truly moves the needle. In my mind, and maybe this is because I lead the organizing work for Swing Left, this seems like an organizing challenge. Can you tell our audience more about giving circles, how they work, why they matter, how folks listening today can really take this kind of collective action to support the candidates and organizations they care about?
Certainly. So we launched Giving Circles in late August this year, and the experience right now, like you go to the website, you submit an interest form, and you tell us, basically, we ask some basic information about your organization. So your Giving Circle and what your objectives are, so we can figure out how to best serve you. This came about because actually last year in 2020, we didn't have a Giving Circles program, obviously, since I said we just launched it, but we had inbound interest. We ended up working with 3 Giving Circles last year, including one from Harvard called Crimson Goes Blue. They have their own website and you can check them out as well. And they started working with Blueprint in June 2020. And then by the end of the year, they had raised over $300,000. And one of the reasons why Crimson Goes Blue was so excited to work with Blueprint is because it's a Giving Circle composed of Harvard alums. And some people are pro candidates and definitely only want to support candidates. And then some people only wanted to support civic organizations. Some people were fine with a mix. And through by working with Crimson Goes Blue, we were able to create a custom portfolio, a custom blueprint that enabled donors to give in that manner. So if you only wanted to support the orgs, it still worked. And you only wanted to support candidates, you could still give through that Act Blue page. So that's that was one giving circle. And then I mentioned we worked with 2 other ones. And we again, as part of our user research after the runoffs in Georgia, and we're trying to see, okay, how can we innovate? How can we improve Blueprint? We sent out a user survey and we saw interest in having a Giving Circles program. So we're excited about the Giving Circles program because we know, especially at Swing Left, like the value of community and how helpful it is to get guidance, because there's just so much out there. There are I think over like 6,000 races next year. We're not even getting into the like org ecosystem, which is, there are just so many organizations doing amazing work. And what's nice about having a giving circle with Blueprint, you tell us your objectives. We also provide you with helpful materials as to, okay, well, this is how you can think about fundraising. We also can help you with webinars or certain events, depending on your needs. And then we work with you to create that slate. Some people just like our default recommendations and they're like, nope, we just want this and we'll just set up a page for us so that we have it like branded, and we do that. We'll have it branded, and and then we provide regular updates to the Giving Circle leaders so they know how they're doing with fundraising. They know who's giving so that they can follow up with maybe people who are straggling a bit. And sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But basically, yeah, that's the Giving Circle experience as we envision it. It's definitely nascent, and we're excited to have more Giving Circles come on and tell us what kind of tools, what kind of resources they would like. I think Giving Circles is exciting too because it embodies some of the best parts of Blueprint. It has the tech aspect as well as the human aspect, because for us, we never want to get too far removed from community and the people and the work, because that's why we're doing it. It's not just like, oh, we just want to win, we just want to enact this. We're trying to bring people together and change the world for the better.
So it's a perfect intersection around organizing and tech and leveraging those tech tools. Big fan of Crimson Goes Blue. They're a powerhouse. Great. So, the last several election cycles have brought with them, an incredible increase in the number of organizing and outreach tools available to the average, volunteer. With this proliferation of options, one of the challenges of creating and deploying these tools is making sure they actually meet the needs of our organizers and our grassroots volunteers, the people actually putting them to work on the ground. Of course, there's so much to take into account when developing any new piece of technology, from accessibility and intuitive user design to training and onboarding challenges, and of course, security best practices. I'd love to hear from the panel here. Can you each tell us a little bit about some of the challenges you faced in developing and deploying your specific tools, whether it was from user adoption perspective or the actual development of the tool itself, and how that's shaped your work going forward? Scott, let's start with you.
Sure. So let's see, challenges in developing and deploying the tools that we use. I think I cited a couple, or one of the main ones in our first round of questions, which is just that as Vote Forward scaled up to try to serve a lot of volunteers, PDF generation turned out to be a more complicated problem than I thought it was going to be at first. I feel like PDFs are the currency of the realm in a way that is sort of wild, that it's still the functional unit of so many different processes. And what we found is that, early on, and this is maybe a little bit overly technical, but it will hopefully paint a picture of the kinds of problems that one might encounter. So in the early version of the Vote Forward software, we had kind of like one monolithic application that was both handling all of the user management and the voter adoption, and then also the process that was like making all the PDFs. And in 2018, what we found was that if you have 10 people doing that all at once, it's fine. But if you have 700 people doing that all at once, it would sort of crash the application that we were running. And so it required some frantic phone calls between me and my volunteer collaborators at the time to kind of like scramble to beef up the specs on the machine that we were running in Google Cloud. That obviously was not a sustainable solution, and we did at one point reach a moment where that just didn't work anymore. And so in 2019 and 2020, we wound up doing a lot of engineering work to change the architecture of the system so that those things could be decoupled from each other, so that the PDF generation process could run on a different kind of like platform than the rest of the web application. So that might be a little too in the weeds, but that is definitely it's exemplary of the kind of problem that you might encounter as you try to scale something up. And so, yeah, that's maybe the most salient one that I would cite. It does also turn out to be somewhat expensive to operate websites at this kind of scale, and that sort of took me by surprise a little bit. And kind of in the first year or so, I was only just like scrambling to raise enough money to just keep the web servers running. And so, I mean, that's a fortunate position to be in because it means that a lot of people are wanting to use the software that we built, but it is a problem. And so we wound up having to also scramble to raise some money to just support the thing at all. Yeah, there's so many more challenges. I don't even know where to start, but maybe I'll turn it over to my co-panelists and maybe I'll think of other things too along the way.
Getting some vote forward origin stories here. I love it. Marilyn, any thoughts?
Yeah, something that comes to mind is customization. So this came up again, 2019, when we're conducting these user interviews, we're doing usability testing, and people are telling us what their ideal flow would be like for Blueprint. And you have a lot of people talking about drag and drop and building their own portfolio. And we didn't go that route. We have the recommendations. We do offer the custom blueprint, but we still operate within the wheelhouse like that Swing Left has identified. So the races, like the level of the ballot, so state-led, now gubernatorial races, as well as congressional and House and Senate races. And then the civic organizations will support national organizations as well as organizations operating in states where we're investing in campaigns. So earlier this year, as part of the product road mapping process, one of the inputs we were using was the user survey that I mentioned, the Blueprint user survey. And we asked about customization. We asked a bunch of questions. We asked about trust and all that. And a lot of people said they wanted more customization in Blueprint. And if you work in tech, you're probably familiar with this. Everyone always wants customization. Then you invest in it, and then no one uses it. And one of the hypotheses we had was that was a shorthand for trust. Like we needed to make some updates that would help people trust us more and trust our recommendations so that they wouldn't feel this desire to have more ownership over it. But that was just a hypothesis. And we needed to get, to Scott's point earlier, more evidence before we decided to invest significant resources in customization, because that would require a whole overhaul of like Blueprint, the portfolio page, everything. So working closely with our analyst, who's not on this call, but works very closely with all of us. She's amazing. She conducted this pretty intense user research program in which found a bunch of donors based off of the survey, and then also after analyzing Blueprint donor data, and then had these conversations with them about customization. And it pretty much, even people who said in their survey, yes, I want customization, once they started having conversations, they didn't want it. So, but it made it clear for us that, okay, well, we can make some improvements to the portfolio page. We can make some things more obvious to users so that they understand what they're getting into. And I think this coincided with the expansion of Swing Left's targets. I mentioned like gubernatorial races. this year, well, this cycle is the first time Swing Left is getting into that. So even the old design of the portfolio page didn't work because we were supporting more strategies. So knowing that we had to update the portfolio page, and then also we have some accessibility considerations that we wanted to incorporate, I think that dovetailed quite nicely with the takeaways from the customization, because we just wanted to make everything more user-friendly and make things like really explicit. So now it's easier to go to the portfolio page, say, oh, okay, this is something, this is a strategy, and it's easy to learn more information about it. So that was a bit of a rambling story, but I think it's an example of, okay, people say they want something. We have to trust them, but like maybe they're saying this and it's shorthand for something else. And then if you probe a bit deeper, then you can find out like lower lift improvements you can make that get you closer to providing a more delightful user experience.
Not at all rambling and super enlightening in terms of just like how y'all think and approach the work. Ruby, any thoughts on in terms of challenges?
Challenges, definitely. There's a lot. But one of the things that some people might not know, but Swing Left was founded as a volunteer effort. Volunteer engineers, designers, really like a super duper scrappy startup. So we incurred some tech debt, moving super fast and designing for the moment, like specifically designing for the midterms in 2018. So one of the biggest learnings that I've had is, that we need to proactively think about laying the foundation for us to scale and iterate rapidly, as well as designing and developing our products for the long term. So it's definitely a balance between doing things fast and doing things right. And especially when you have a small team, we have 3 engineers on the Swing Left team. It's even more important to over communicate the trade-offs and decisions made, and also to reflect and learn from those decisions to inform future iterations. One major investment we've made this year is to set up a centralized data warehouse so that we can more accurately tell rich stories about how our users interact with Swing Left products and their whole journey throughout Swing Left, which I'm super excited to combine with our qualitative user research efforts next year to, again, be more proactive and forward-thinking in our product work.
I am equally as excited on the data warehouse efforts that we're investing in here at Swing Left. Perfect segue. I'd love to dive into the data piece a bit more. It seems like every day we're able to capture more information from our tools and learn about how our grassroots activists are deploying them and really understand our voters a little bit better. For each of you, what's been your approach to integrating all of this information into your work and using this data to improve on the products and the user experience as we head into 2022 and beyond? Ruby, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So to test some of our assumptions around developing the new version of the Swing District Finder for 2022, I recently conducted user interviews with volunteers, group leaders, donors to validate if we were meeting them where they're at. It's important to keep in mind that while all of us, and I'm sure a lot of people on this call, are living and breathing the political discourse every day, and then we also know that our users are super passionate, they still need like common language and guidance navigating the complexity of our political system and also our strategy. So during my interviews, there were tons of like aha moments, like, why didn't I think of that? Like, that's so obvious. Which just further reminds me and reinforces how important it is to get objective feedback as early in the process as possible from all types of users, from the most engaged volunteers to people who are passionate about making a difference but don't know where to get started. So my big thing here is to both combine the quantitative research with early feedback from specifically users, and also from people who might be prospective users, not even having no awareness of what Swing Left is, and asking them, what do you see? What does this mean to you? How would you interact with this? To get incredible feedback to make the best products possible.
Very helpful. Thank you. Scott, we'd love to hear from you on this too.
Well, first of all, big endorsement of what Ruby just said. I think that ethos is a really important part of good product development, and I think Vote Forward probably doesn't do enough of it. We do some, but I'd like to do more. Really, just listening to our volunteers and hearing what they have to say about not just the product as it currently stands, but the specific thing I'd like to do more of is getting new ideas for the future in front of them and hearing how they respond to them, even in a very open-ended way. I think the place where we do use data really effectively is, once again, in evaluating the impact of our program. So that's kind of the core data that we deal with is voter data, which we are fortunate in being able to use to evaluate our efficacy, because we're aiming at something that's easy to measure, which is, do people vote or not? And so that's kind of the guiding thread behind all of the externally facing work for voters that we do. And then on the internal side, we've definitely also benefited from some both quantitative and qualitative survey type instruments for our volunteers. So after our program in 2020, we sent a really big survey to get a sense of how people felt about the program and what they were excited about for the future, which has had an impact on the choices that we've made since then. We also just recently have been doing a little bit of qualitative research with voters as well. And that's something I'm excited to do more of too, because we have hypotheses about things that we want to test out there in the world for increasing voter turnout. And we do that. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. But I think to generate more hypotheses, the kind of like earlier stage in that process of figuring out, well, what makes sense to even spend the time and energy to test in the field in the first place, I think even a few focused conversations with voters can help guide that. And we've definitely seen that help to inspire some of the more promising work that we've done in the last year or so. So yeah, those are a few thoughts on how it comes into play.
Yeah, and getting that feedback is just going to get you so much buy-in as well, like when it comes to just like from the users themselves.
It's a really good point. Like people also, the volunteers we speak to about the Vote Forward product, they also just really enjoy having their voice heard.
Yeah.
And we have, in particular, a pool of what I sometimes think of as like super volunteers, the people who do the most, who write the most number of letters and are sort of super engaged in everything that we do. And you wouldn't want to listen to just them because they have their own perspective. But it is a nice sort of rapport building exercise. And it's fun to talk to them and hear what they have to say. So definitely encourage that.
100%. Marilyn.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with or echo a lot of what Ruby and Scott said. So I guess if I were to add anything, what I'm looking forward to in 2022 is using the data that we have on hand to provide more tailored experiences to Blueprint users. As I mentioned, people can tell us if they care more about or they prefer to the majority of their contribution to go to candidates or organizations. We also, I mean, this is all voluntary, but you can also put the different issue areas you're interested in. So healthcare, reproductive rights, so on and so forth. And we also consider content like a core feature of Blueprint, providing those impact reports, substantive emails. So I'd love for us to be able to leverage that data a bit more about knowing what our donors are interested in, their self-professed interests, and then how they're engaging with the product and how we treat them differently. I think that would mostly start with email, and then we can use that as a test and see how that affects conversion. And then if there are some hypotheses we can make that we could then apply to the product. Another thing I'd like to mention, and this is Ruby's influence, which is great. Ruby's my boss and I love working with her, is that she's pushing us to think more about testing. So we have some exciting things on the product roadmap. So you should just, I don't know, go to Blueprint and swing left, or go to the booth and get on our lists. But we want to test. We want to make sure that we're seeing like what people are responding to, what makes the most sense before we like fully commit and just get all the data we need to inform like subsequent iterations on the product. So that's a priority for us going forward. We already are like, we have a meeting next week to talk about it with something that's under wraps. I can't share yet. But yeah, I'm really excited to get more into that testing mindset as opposed to thinking it's like one size fits all. We know that's not the case. We have so much data. So how are we making sure that a donor who's been giving year round for like a decade gets what they need out of Blueprint, and someone who's new and is just like really fired up and cares about organizations, how do they get a Blueprint experience that keeps them engaged quarter after quarter, year after year?
Helpful. Looking ahead, and since each of you is to a greater or lesser extent in community with other organizations and individuals in the political tech and tool space, I'm sure you've been having some interesting conversations as we pivot more and more to digital and online organizing. COVID-19 pandemic has really only accelerated the move to transition some offline in-person organizing into a more tech and digital tool space. With that in mind, I'd be curious if you can share your thoughts for the future of the conjunction of digital tech tools and how they work in-person organizing and mobilization, either for your own work now or more so generally. What does the future of this type of work look like to you? Ruby, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, David. I mean, the word when I think about the future of the conjunction of digital tech tools and in-person organizing, is like scale. We can scale all of our volunteer and fundraising efforts, both remote and in person, by leaning into our digital tech tools and solutions. We can reach new users who previously may have thought that based on where they live, that they couldn't have an impact. And one clear example of this, I think, comes from the founding of Swing Left, which we proved with the Swing District Finder in 2017, that even if you live in hyper blue states like New York or California, you can still canvass. And if you can't canvass, you can have a breadth of online ways to get involved and have just as big an impact through letter writing or through phone banking or through other online fundraising. And so the other part of it too is like taking action more accessible to more people. So another part of it that I'm really excited about exploring is how we might track and visualize impact, something that Blueprint has done an incredible job of in the fundraising space that I think that there's opportunity to do in organizing and mobilizing as well.
And I can list so many volunteers who'd be so interested in knowing more about impact and direct impact as a result of organizing efforts. So really looking forward to testing around that front. Scott.
Two quick thoughts. One is, in some ways, I think Vote Forward maybe partly accidentally wound up being an answer to your question last year. Obviously, we didn't plan it this way, but when the world closed down and a lot of politically active people were still looking for a real life activity that would have an impact in 2020, with canvassing and knocking doors not really being an option, and even like in-person voter registration drives not really being an option, it was an appealing choice to be able to do something that felt very personal, but to do it at home and in a safe way. We also saw that people adapted the way they engaged with it for that environment. It was still social, so people kind of pivoted their what had been in-person parties, like letter writing parties, to be instead Zoom letter writing parties. But they were still doing something physical, and it's just that they didn't have to. In some ways, it's actually even better. We had a panel with some volunteers earlier this morning where they were noting that they have more people attending their Zoom calls than they ever routinely did for their in-person meetings, because nobody has to drive. I guess it depends on the traffic, how big of a problem that is, but it can be a problem. It's like a lot easier to come to something like this than it is to drive to Palo Alto or whatever. So I definitely think that things have changed a lot, but there are probably some advantageous. Some of those changes are advantageous. As for the future of the proper in-person activities, I don't think those are ever going to go away. I think my hope is that next year we'll be back in the business of knocking on doors. And I think my guess is that there's going to be a way to do that safely. And I think we should do that. So I guess this is maybe a little bit Pollyannish, but my hope is that we'll get to keep all the good parts of what changed in the last 2 years and also go back to having the benefits of some of the stuff that we haven't really been able to do since then. So fingers crossed. That's
Scream it from the rooftops. It's not a false choice. You can do both. Yeah, 100%. Before we wrap up, I'd like to ask each of you, any closing thoughts you may have on our central theme today, which is really empowering grassroots action through technology and tools. The point of these tools and platforms isn't just that they're new and cool and interesting, even though they really are. It's that we're really empowering people to mobilize, elect Democrats, create real change in their communities. With that in mind, how do we avoid shiny object syndrome, if you will? What is your approach been to keeping an organizing and mobilizing mission front and center in your own work? And what recommendations do you have for others who are either entering the tech and tool space themselves or even just engaging with some of these platforms? Scott, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I mean, I'm maybe going to be a bit of a broken record on this one, but I think part of the thing that helps discipline the avoidance of the shiny object is grounding your mission in some concrete impact on the world that you can measure. So like if your goal is to increase voter turnout by some measurable amount, and you're performing a randomized trial that allows you to know whether you did that, there's not much temptation to be distracted by shiny objects like, novel Facebook advertisement strategies or something like that, because it's really hard to formulate a theory about how exactly that's going to impact the thing that you care about. So that's my perspective. I think that's only useful insofar as you're working on something that is susceptible to that kind of measurement. Not everything is. So I think one area that I'm interested in and don't know much about is issue advocacy. How do you do that work in a way that you really can feel confident that you're having the impact that you want to have and think you're having? I think it's much harder to tell. So I'm not sure that my advice helps very much in that space. But I think there's often a way to ground your goals in something very concrete and measurable. And if you do that and try to be disciplined about paying attention to those goals, you're not going to be distracted. And I think that can be helpful.
100%. Ruby, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think this is a great closing question. My recommendation for others entering the progressive tech space, kind of, again, also broken record, like we've talked about, is incorporating testing and validating ideas and assumptions as early as possible into your work, both qualitative and quantitative. And that means like baking it into your budget. If you find yourself asking your team, wouldn't it be cool if we did XYZ or whatever? Back that up with data. Start with the problem that you're trying to solve. At the very least, survey your audience, and then also to that effect, know your audience, and that should never be everyone. It should be specific. You should understand their motivations, their challenges. Make sure you're solving real problems for real people. And audience and persona work, user persona work, is not like a one and done. You need to constantly revisit it, especially as we are working in a world where everything is constantly changing. Redistricting is a different world than 2018. Trump is in office, Trump is not in office. There's an insurrection. There's some other Supreme Court situation. That all of these things are inputs that change all the time, and change what our audience is motivated by and challenged by. So know who your audience is and continue to test and validate your assumptions.
Sage advice. Marilyn.
As per usual, I agree with my colleagues. I think one other thing I'd add to knowing your audience, it's important you get early adopters, right? And those people are probably more likely to become your power users. They're super bought in, but then you have to do more work to persuade people, like once you move beyond that segment in the market. So that's just another reason why I'm totally on board with what Ruby's saying. Like, you have to constantly update your user personas, make sure you're moving in lockstep with your audience so that you're meeting them where they are. I think transparency goes a long way, because I think that helps with accountability. It holds you accountable to your users. And then if you make transparency an integral part of your product, that like permeates your culture as well. I think it influences how you think about certain things, the decision making process, and keeps like hopefully stops you from like chasing after something that's shiny. It's like, well, yeah, I think it stops you from doing that because you're focused, or maybe if you do it and it doesn't work, it's fine to also communicate that. We are in a tough environment. We're gonna lose some races. I mean, at Swing Left, we focus on competitive races. So for us, we expect to lose, right? Like if we're winning all the races, it's like, ooh, were we really choosing the most competitive ones? So it's one like metric we use a lot is the percentage of dollars that we move to races that were won or lost by single digit margins. And I think communicating that with users helps us. That's just like one example of transparency that I think helps people trust us more. And they recognize, okay, they're building this. It's helping me understand how this works. I get why I'm using this tool and I get the objective. I get how this is supporting this end goal. Um, yeah, I don't really have much to add beyond that, but I think transparency, so long as you recognize that you have to explain yourself to your audience and not in and not seeing that as a punishment, but seeing that as something good to maintain those like channels of communication, I think that will help you orient yourself in the right way and the tools in your roadmap and all that fun stuff.
It's a humble approach to the work, that's for sure. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. That's all the time we have for today. If any from our audience has any questions that weren't answered today, or just want to learn more about our work, I'd really invite you to visit our booth at the expo. There's a function to reach out to the Swing Left team directly, as well as links to a couple of items that may be of interest. Visit swingleft.org. You can learn more about our mission, values, impact, and last cycles, what we're planning for 2022 and the years ahead, and how to get involved. You can also view our 10-year strategic plan, which really lays out our path forward to strengthen democracy and defeating the GOP in key state and federal races, over the next decade. You can also find a link to Blueprint, where you can dive in, a little deeper into how the donor portfolio and Given Circle programs work. And then you'll also find a link to Vote Forward, where you can sign up to write handwritten voter turnout letters to potential voters across the country using this unique platform that we've been talking about today and that Scott and his team developed over the past few years. I hope y'all will sign up to receive updates from Swing Left so that we can really keep in touch about the most urgent and impactful ways for you to get involved in races around the country and as we get ready to take on the midterms in the election cycle. I'd also like to say thank you again to our panelists, Ruby, Marilyn, and Scott. And of course, thanks to much of all of you for your time and attention today. I really think that the barrier to entry to get involved, at the donation and at the organizing space has never been lower. And organizations such as Swing Left and Democrats in the progressive space, we're really prioritizing and making sure that we continue to lower that barrier to entry and making sure that we're meeting people where they are in language and in culture and in accessibility. So thank you all for really tuning in and have a great rest of your Friday.